Okay. Hopefully you're seeing my screen there. Uh,
Yes, we
um,
can see it.
Good. Right, we are ticking along nicely in this course, and we had a good session earlier, really clarifying that exposure, likelihood, severity, thinking a little bit about a sort of audit finding and how we write that up using that formula or recipe. So you're getting nicely the puzzle pieces together on how to prepare one of these safe system audits. Yeah, this module and then another module, and then we're ready to send you out there to do a mock safe system audit at a site close to you. But we do want to talk about different road users and some of their needs. So we're going to delve into pedestrian, cyclists, motorcyclists today and think about their specific needs and some of the opportunities we have to improve safety for these road users. So let's tick on. Okay, one network framework or movement in place, I think, is an important starting point. Some of you will be experts at this, and you'll have a really wonderful understanding of what the concepts are here from a strategic planning sense. We don't need auditors to be experts in movement in place, one network framework, strategic planning, and the like, but in order for us to make helpful recommendations, we want to have a good grasp of this. So I'm going to give you like some basics, and there's plenty of reading. There's plenty of sort of training modules and things you can do on this if you want to delve deeper into it. But the concept really is to think about the road network and the street network as providing both movement functions and place functions and a combination potentially of both. So what do I mean by that? Well, roads and streets probably started out as a movement corridor, but then that's, movement of vehicles, but it's also can be movement of bikes or public transport or people walking. It's any kind of movement of people and goods. But place then sort of built up around a lot of these areas. And place is the concept of an area to trade, to interact with others, to socialize, to yeah, it generates economic activity, but also social connection. So these have built up, and it's recognition that our roads and streets sometimes play far more than just a role of moving people and goods through them. So then you start to categorize areas into these different categories, and this is New Zealand's categorization both for rural and urban, and you can see there we've got, if I look at the urban one, for example, we've got we've got these transit corridors up here, which are just about movement. So that could be a motorway, but it also could be a cycleway in its own right. But regardless, it's about moving people and goods through that area. And you don't want, you're basically saying we don't want people hanging out there, trading, socializing, any of that, right? Down the other end, in these civic spaces and your sort of high-end place with low movement function, these are your malls, your areas where you're not providing that movement function. You don't need to provide that movement function. Yes, it's technically a street or a road, but you're not trying to put vehicles or bikes or anything through there at any sort of speed. And it's more an area to hang out and have a coffee and a drink and shop and do all these other activities. And of course, then you've got all these other areas in between. But the importance of this from a like safe system audit perspective is to say, well, okay, we can achieve safe outcomes and highly aligned safe system outcomes in many ways. So we can do it through creating, barrier systems down a road, continuous barrier systems, and you can do it at high speed. But if it's sitting, if you've got any kind of place desire out of an area, that's just going to erode it. Like it's not a place. Likewise, we can have very safe areas by removing vehicles or slowing vehicles down and slowing bikes down and making it really low speed environment. And you're starting to erode the movement function there. So that's going to be no good as you're up here. So yeah, I mean, they're sort of extreme examples, but it's about thinking about appropriate treatments for the different categorization. So let's have a little go at that, get you doing something. If an area is like defined as a civic space, like down in that quadrant there, or that little segment down there, low movement and high place. Let's take this, for example. We're maybe aspiring to alter it to a high movement, a high place and low movement. What are some of the things you think we could alter in the physical environment here that would make it more place orientated, but also get us higher safety outcomes, better safety outcomes? Pop some ideas in the chat. Okay. Well, this is good. We've got lots of ideas, and yeah, you don't really have a lot of context or information to do this. So as expected, there's quite a variety of things here, but one I think we'll give a prize to Kaylee there on close the road, right? That's a great starting point when you're down at this, when you're down there and you're saying this is high place and low movement. Well, why we even got it open to traffic? It's a great starting place. And then you sort of build up from that. If you say, well, no, it's actually got some movement requirement. And then what we're seeing there from lots of others are really good. And things like reducing speed or even shared spaces, shared zones, narrowing it down and widening the footpath, all good things. Wombat crossing. So things like dedicated crossing points are, as you've built up your movement corridor, because a dedicated crossing point essentially says this is a road and pedestrians, you can use this bit to cross it. Okay, there's certainly good safety features, but if you are in high place areas, really the whole road should be a safe place for pedestrians crossing and moving around. But absolutely right, without knowing the full context of this, as we build that movement requirement, we get to those dedicated crossing points. Lots of good ideas there, so thank you. And each of those ideas that came in are addressing either exposure or likelihood or severity, or sometimes a combination. So things like closing the road is a reduction in the exposure. You've eliminated exposure to vehicle crashes with pedestrians. Things like reducing speed will reduce the likelihood and severity, as will things like shared spaces and the like. If you go to one direction traffic flow, that's an interesting one in terms of, does it alter exposure or likelihood or severity? Well, okay, so without having some traffic modeling to show you the change in number of vehicles associated with making it one way, you really can't make a confident call on a change of exposure, because maybe they're making this one way, one direction, and then the parallel road one way, the other direction. We're still going to see the same amount of vehicles through here. Okay, then you haven't changed the exposure. But if you are presented with that information to say, well, traffic volume will significantly go down, then you are making a call that you've altered exposure. But making it one way would reduce the likelihood of crashes, because it's an easier task for pedestrians, knowing that vehicles are coming only one direction, and it's easier at intersections for other vehicles and the like. But if we're not doing anything to manage speed, the severity of incident wouldn't come down either. So lots of good stuff there. Thank you, everybody. So let's have a look here. This is artistic impressions out of actually a US guide. So some different bits and pieces, but very low speed. And okay, this still appears to have some sort of movement requirements, but you can see it's a much more friendly place to be. I don't think they need a dedicated crossing point here. I mean, this is essentially all a shared zone, but so take it with a grain of salt. But you can see the one thing I suppose of note here is the fact that we've reduced the crossing distance, so the width of the road, that reduces the likelihood of crashes. Sometimes people really want to say that's a reduction in exposure. And probably in our traditional way, we thought about exposure in road safety for many years. That's how people are influenced by it. But the reason we don't talk about that is exposure is the number of pedestrians crossing the road. And then the likelihood is influenced by speed of vehicles, the distance they've got to travel across the road to make their crossing point, sight distances, lighting, all these other features. But as you build up that movement function and movement requirement, you may get into the point of providing separation of particular road user groups. You've definitely moved this now further up the movement corridor. You can see dedicated travel lanes for bikes, for public transport vehicles, and the like, but still retaining some good place value out of it. Now, I'll keep going. Local streets, so residential areas and the like, generally talked about as low movement and low place. We don't tell the residents we think of their area as low place value, but it is that place value from the sense of all those other features we were talking about. But in these areas, you're really able to manage speed significantly due to the speed of vehicles, that is, due to the fact that we are down on our movement requirement. So as soon as anybody tells you that you're in this category, it's fine to significantly lower speeds, to block access, so people can't use these areas as rat runs, and that's sort of how we're able to get some pretty good safety outcomes in these areas. Artistic impression is probably far more built up than some of them that you'd be thinking about, but we'd sort of be looking to again make it wider footpaths, crossing points, lower speed, and yes, there's still movement ability through these areas. Again, artistic impression, take it with a grain of salt. Okay, when we get up to these areas where it starts to get really difficult, because we're trying to do everything with a road or a street. You've got a high movement requirement, and it's usually you've got high movement requirement for passenger vehicles, public transport, bikes, and then you're also trying to say, and it's also a high place area because it's our high street, and it's where all the cafes and bars and shops are. And you're like, wow, okay, we're trying to do everything with this bit of road or street. So I always, if I'm chatting with the project managers, strategic planners, or the like for an audit, and they say, and I ask, okay, well, what movement and place function have you done some movement and place thinking? Where does it sit within the One Network framework? And if they say, well, it's up in the city hub, I say, okay, can you give me something to work with here? Yeah, can you give me either, okay, it's a bit more movement, a bit more towards urban connectors, or a bit more towards main streets. Just give me something, because doing everything with a road is very challenging. And so when you get these sort of roads, and they're high speed, but they've got pedestrian shops and different activity and the like, and they put in that, well, we want high place and high movement. It becomes challenging, but the high place requirement on it sort of starts to dictate a lot of what should and could be done. So you see there in the artistic impression, at least, like the removal of things like, well, a pedestrian overpass and pedestrian fencing, they all just erode place value. They're very good on just higher, like, movement corridors where you're not trying to get place. But you can see there, this is a much friendlier place. We are still moving people and goods through here, bikes, cars, public transport, and you can do it in reasonable ways. This artistic impression has much lower speed limits, and the travel speed through there and the travel time through there will probably be reasonably similar, but this may look like such a huge leap, but we incrementally do this, and we have seen this sort of stuff playing out. And maybe it doesn't look as pretty as the drawings, but it does play out. And you're seeing some of this stuff start to roll out in Christchurch over the years, and providing those bike facilities and more place. More place value with still retaining movement corridor through there. We're seeing lots of different areas where we're providing the movement corridor, not just thinking about vehicles, protected intersections, for example, like this one. Okay, they retain a good movement corridor. They help a little bit with place, but not huge amounts, but you're able to certainly provide safe movement for lots of different road users. I'll talk maybe a little bit more. I'm just trying to think whether I talk a little bit more about these sorts of facilities. I might just briefly talk about this for now, and why these sorts of facilities are becoming more and more popular at signalized intersections. Some of you are fully aware of this, but if you provide this for a vehicle to make their left turn, they have to sort of come out, then they get a much clearer view of a cyclist coming through there, as opposed to turning closer to the cyclist or being able to cut that corner. So we see quite a good reduction in the likelihood of cyclist crashes with these treatments. The severity's sometimes a little bit lower, but it's mainly about influencing the likelihood of crashes. Okay. So in the urban connections and even into transit corridors, this is where we start to do things that erode the place value of an area. But we're doing that because that's not the priority. So that's where you start to look at pedestrian overpasses, underpasses, blocking access for pedestrians, almost starting to move it to urban motorways or full cycle corridors, blocked off to others and the like. But we do still need to think about conflict points at these, even if it is urban connection categorization, and we're trying to move vehicles through there in reasonably quick manner. We we still have to think about things like signalized intersections where vehicles will run red lights, and thinking about calming speed down through these specific areas of conflict. So you don't, just because it's been categorized in urban connections, abandon our like safety thinking. We certainly need to continue to do that. So I've like just trying to sort of simplify the whole thing. Okay, so this is for a rural environment, and generally in rural environments, we aren't trying to achieve place value in its traditional sense. Okay, yes, the townships in different areas, a different story, but the bulk of our network, without any of that place requirement, we sort of think about then the categorization of the highest movement corridors. To get our highest alignment with safe system principles, we want continuous barrier systems, and then we want grade separated intersections, and if not, we want to make them roundabouts and slow people down. Okay, then you sort of move down the corridor in terms of movement functions, and we'll see still that separation to retain the higher speeds. Things like at grade intersections where we accelerate vehicles up to speed before they move, so you get the speed differential down. The REORS style intersection treatments where we lower the speed limit actively based on approaching vehicles from side roads. And as you sort of continue down, that's where we start to then say, well, we're going to manage speeds in these lower movement requirement roads, and then do a lot of our traditional likelihood reduction techniques with warning signs, edge lines, and center lines, and warnings, and the like. So that's a sort of simplistic way of thinking about it. Put your big dollars into your main movement corridors, and then manage speed lower on your lesser order ones. And the speed management framework in New Zealand sort of aligns generally with this philosophy. Urban areas become an interesting one, where we've got the place requirement really kicking in. And so movement, motorways, dedicated cycleways up there. But then, as we've still got that high movement requirement, we're going to have those separation of users and sort of tick this through. And down where we've got low movement requirement, we can significantly lower speed limits. Anyway, just there is a little bit of some pictures of areas that are sort of fitting into those categories. We'll pause there and see if Loretta's got any questions for me before I start sort of honing in on some of the specifics we would look at as safe system auditors when we're thinking about cyclists, and then we'll do pedestrians and motorcyclists.
Thank you, Ken. There's a couple of questions that have come through. One earlier when you were talking about closing roads. So the question is, closing roads would lead to an increase in vehicle travel distance, potentially resulting in a rise in pollution levels. Doesn't it consider?
Okay, that's a fair question to ask. Okay, but potentially it would result in more people walking and cycling, or walking through the area instead of driving through the area. So I can argue the other side of it. But the point is that there are so many objectives we have to improve transport. We've got the environmental objectives. We've got, we want more people active and healthy and riding bikes and walking. We want to make it accessible for everybody, so nobody in the community is stuck. So we've got all of that. We've got to ensure we make it environmentally friendly and sensitive cultural heritage and the like. Okay, so the thing is, though, when we're doing a safe system audit, we, to a degree, have the luxury that all we're looking at is safety. Now, we're not doing the huge multi-criteria assessment of a transport project. We're not like out there saying, oh, well, I'm not sure, you know, that this is, yeah, you know, any other thing outside of safety is not our concern. Now, as a transport professional, you might make some notes in another email or something and say, hey, by the way, but for us as safe system auditors, all we are looking at is the safety of the traveling public. So technically, we don't care if it creates more emissions. Like, of course we care, but our job is not to report on that. Our job is to report on whether it's safer or not. Now, I've been on audit teams and I've looked at the project and gone, I hate this project. This project is going to push objectives that we don't want. There's strategies out there that are saying we're trying to get people, you know, less car orientated, but this is just about, you know, but the reality of that is I can't put any of that into my audit report. Okay, I can write an email on the side and say, hey, I actually don't think this project is a good investment. And here's some reasons why, but not in your audit report. And I say this because people try to sometimes use road safety reporting and audit reports and things for other objectives of transport. And we really want to be clear about that. We're doing a safety assessment. So anyway, that's that.
Thank you. We've got another question that's come through. Now, excuse me, Patricia has kindly provided a link to the Waka Kotahi's pedestrian network guidance. So thank you, Patricia. But you might have a comment on this question, Ken. So is there some sort of a barrier that can be used both as a crash barrier and a pedestrian fencing in city hubs or urban connectors?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a good question. So just be aware that putting a pedestrian fencing up is just going to erode your place value of an area significantly. As soon as we start corralling and trying to, you know, treat pedestrians like sheep and move them into our specific areas, you've just lost the place value of an area. So I personally don't like pedestrian fencing in most locations on the network. It also comes potentially with some safety concerns of trapping pedestrians on the wrong side of it. And I'll show you some stuff about that shortly. But if you are looking to do that, your traditional W-beam systems or your flexible W-beam systems do a decent job of that. We do now have the thinner profile. You're not needing to use the large blockouts of traditional W-beam, where we can provide some thinner barrier systems, and you can do back-to-back W-beam systems, so there's not the posts exposed. And you know that works pretty well. I mean, yes, pedestrians can step over it. It's a bit of an effort to step over it, but they can jump over most of the fences we put if they want to anyway. The other one that I think is dramatically underutilized in urban areas is high profile barrier curb. And so it's a normal barrier curb like we've got, and you can actually sort of see some in this photo, for example. Oh, it's a bit hard to see, but like, you know, just our usual barrier curbing, that is not a redirective device whatsoever. A vehicle leaves their lane, they just mount that curb. It won't do, it does not redirect. But there are high profile barrier curbs, which there's different profiles of them, but they sit up quite a little bit higher than that, you know, like a normal barrier curb probably comes up to about here, and a high profiles, you know, well higher than it. They have been crash tested at lower speeds. So vehicles, you know, leaving their their lane, they will hit that and be redirected. And so where you've got these areas where you've got higher speed traffic, like I'm talking not high speed traffic, 50 kilometer per hour or the like, and you're trying to retain a little bit of that place feel and the like, so you don't want to be putting up big fences, but you're a little bit concerned. A high profile barrier curve in some situations can be quite a useful product. What else have we got there?
That was, pretty much it. Lots of, resources to links, which has been great. So thank you to everyone for, providing those.
Yeah, and there are some great, wonderful documents. I think the pedestrian network guidance is wonderful, and these sort of things. So lots of it, which will be helpful outside of just your safe system auditing, but good to have that context and thinking as you do the auditing to provide useful recommendations. Well, let's talk about cyclists or people that ride bikes, as some people get very, very angry about me calling them cyclists. And okay, that's, yeah. So they want us to use the term people that ride bikes because it humanizes the road user rather than cyclist. I think we're getting a bit, it's referred to as cyclists in all of our Austroads guides and everything like that. So I will continue to use the term cyclist. I apologize if that's annoying to you. But let's talk about some common issues that we might identify as auditors for cyclists. And I put this one up as the first because it's a very obvious one. And the idea of a longitudinal grate is one where cyclists are going to potentially be impacted. I've done 2 legal expert witness cases where there's been incidents of cyclists dropping their wheel into a longitudinal grate. And in both of those, when I'm there, I say, well, I've been running the audit course for 20 years, and the first thing and first example I use for cyclist safety, because it's so obvious, and it should be picked up. So what we want to look out for are these areas where we've got these existing and cyclists are there, and any designs where we might be pushing new cyclists into areas where there are existing longitudinal grates. I really haven't seen, here's a bit of footage. I really haven't seen a design in decades where somebody has designed in a new longitudinal grate on a cycle, apart from on a motorway, but where there's no cyclists. But even then, you question why. But what I have seen a fair bit of is, existing roads have longitudinal grates, and there's works being done there. Sometimes works to encourage cyclists and make it more cyclists, where they haven't thought about that existing longitudinal grate. So our recommendation is then either to remove that, have other drainage, or put cycle-friendly cycle-friendly features on the grate. So there you go. Another common audit finding, well, it's not, maybe it's not common, but is thinking about the bicycle storage boxes. So this is where a rider comes up, and then there's queued traffic at the signals, and then the cyclist can get out the front, be viewed, and off they go. Well, over on this side, in this one, they were creating these cycle storage boxes, and they were doing some other improvements, and they put the cycle storage box here, or they were planning to. And in the site visit with the audit team, we were out there, we're looking at it, and the signal phasing, when they had Blythe Street down here running that way, they had the left turn arrow going in this way. So what it did was, it would conjure up a potential situation where cyclists would be up here storing in their storage box, and there would be a green left turn arrow for a vehicle approaching here. Became an interesting one and a bit of fun discussion and debate in the team as to how we were going to risk rate that, because we were saying, well, it's not like the car's not going to miss the cyclist right in front of them in their lane. But it's going to be more like a road rage incident, isn't it? Because if you've got a cyclist in front of you and you've got a green left turn arrow, but you can't, like, there'll be beeping and all sorts of issues. So then we sort of go into this, okay, is road rage and any kind of, you know, violence associated with that part of a road safety audit? And it's not. I suppose it goes back to one of those things of, you know, personal safety is not part of a road safety audit. And so by that, I mean, you know, like if they're proposing an underpass and you're looking at it and you go, well, I think from a personal safety perspective, people are, you know, that's a concern because it's long and it could be dark and there's no way to get out of it. That's not a road safety audit issue or a safe system audit issue. Now, if then you go, well, it's dark and it's dingy and people won't use it and they're going to use the road and that's unsafe from a road safety perspective. Now we're back into safe system audit territory. But so I'm just trying to get that sort of clarity in your mind. But yeah, in terms of this one, we ended up sort of risk rating it, I think, based on more the movements that vehicles would probably make to get around a cyclist and potentially, you know, going close to the cyclist and the like, as they sort of got around it and swept past the dragging of larger vehicles making that turn. So in the end, it really didn't matter because it's just wrong and it'll be fixed. Like you know, this one, it didn't take much debate, but interesting bit of thinking. So Michael's put in there in the chat, road rage could lead to poor decision-making further along the road. I mean, I think that is possibly the case. Again, I always try not to draw too long a bow in my safety thinking in a safe system audit, because you can sort of always, you know, extend it along and say, okay, well, you know, that might cause a little bit more congestion, which would frustrate people, and then they're going to drive a bit faster because they're frustrated when they can, and then, you know, you know, you go on, and you can create all sorts of scenarios in your mind. So I tend to try to just hone it back to specific issues. But, you know, I think those ones are interesting. They're more your big picture head scratches and thinking than they are as a specific audit finding. Okay, let's pop this up. So you can do a safe system audit of this bit of path network. I'll give a prize if you can tell me what country this is in while we Gareth's onto it in Wales. My Welsh is getting better and better. I'll translate that for you. Translates to cyclist dismount. Now back to some thank you. Yes, I'm getting a round of applause. Let's find some issues here for cyclists. Anything you might think could be an issue for cyclists. Okay, this is a great group. Straight onto it. Okay, Ruth is straight away gone. Catch pit, not cycle friendly. Beautiful. Prize there, because we just talked about that. And here you go, one that somebody at some point probably put orientated that way, so a cyclist along the road doesn't fall into it. But right across then the cycleway we've got a longitudinal. Great. So well done. Then we've got a lot of people who are rightly sort of talking about the sight lines and the fence blocking sight lines. So vehicles coming up and we don't have that sight triangle open. And that's an interesting one. And I dare say why somebody has put this up. I've gone, oh, yeah, so, okay, well, we'll tell cyclists to stop and to get off their bike and look and then cross the road. In my opinion, this is the most useless sign in the whole signage suite. Like, we just know cyclists aren't going to dismount. Like, that's crazy. And all it really does is, well, it makes life a bit easier for us as auditors because we know that there's an issue there because somebody else has highlighted and marked it for us. We haven't done anything about it. And the height of stupidity is when you see this sort of stuff happening. And yeah, like, so just let's try and address the issue. I know sometimes it's very hard, but yeah, this is a real cop out. Anyway, back to this. What can we do? And to a degree, we have the slight luxury of when we audit and make our recommendations, we can put things out there that may be challenging, but we can push for that. So we could put out there to do a sort of, cut of the fence. Okay, they would have to have a chat with the residents and have a chat about that, but that would certainly assist in this situation. If there's lots of options that they could deviate the path around the other side of this building, big dollars, some dollars associated with that. Yes, even little things like switching the ped and the bike path over, or measures to slow the vehicles on the approach as well. We don't have the vision from either side, but slowing the vehicles on the approach, especially this side, is going to assist. You could alter priority. You could signalize it. You could make this a raised crossing point. The other thing associated with some of this, though, is, okay, maybe if we made this a priority bike and pedestrian crossing, okay, so we extended that through, and then cars have to slow down and stop to give way. There's still a sight distance issue. So we would be able to note that in our audit recommendation. So if you're recommending something in your audit report that also has some risk, just be transparent with it. Say, you could consider making their cyclist priority, slowing vehicles on the approach. However, the sight distance issue is still there, and you might want to consider other ways to lessen that. Yeah, so then there's the interesting one, okay, so some people are talking about, well, what about like forcing the cyclist to dismount? And by that, we mean some sort of fencing arrangement which they can't ride through. And that's where we see, the idea of like the fence that has, that, and then this one, here, and they've got to go in there, and they can't, they can't walk through it. Now, these are discouraged in a lot of the cycling guidance documents but they're discouraged because of interrupting the speed maintenance of a cyclist, and they really erode, the ability to continue to move through these. From a pure road safety perspective, yes, you'll get a slightly better outcome with these. But it comes with other challenges. But it could be a recommendation as an auditor. And you might, want to note that. I like Tom's Tom's comment, cyclist dismount is like asking a driver to get out and push their car for a bit. I tend to agree in there. You've got about as much chance of both of those happening. Give Tom a prize for that. I like it. Well, let's talk about cyclists and roundabouts, because that's a really interesting one. We know the advantage of a roundabout for a vehicle-to-vehicle interaction, slowing vehicles at an intersection, improved angles. Cyclists and roundabouts has been a bit of a challenge for a while, and the old Austroads guidance and the way in New Zealand it used to be done would be to have your cycle lane like this and try to push cyclists as far out as possible. So to get them away from danger, was the theory. Keep them away from the vehicles. And so they go, try and get them to take that travel line through as a cyclist. And this is in these urban single lane roundabouts. But what was sort of discovered was that there was overrepresentation of cyclists in crashes at roundabouts, and they looked at a lot of roundabouts, and there was a lot of sort of vehicles coming up here having clear sight distances out here, but then continuing through and striking cyclists. And the behavioral psychologists, human factors experts had a field day with this, and people did their whole PhDs on this and the like, which was what we call a look but failed to see crash. And they talk about the fact that a driver approaching up here is looking to their right for a vehicle, a car or a truck. They're not looking for a cyclist, even though the cyclist is in their field of view. It just takes them longer to process the idea that they also have to stop for that. They also talk about threat theory, in the sense that then the drivers aren't as quick to react because it's not a threat to their safety. They talk about saturation points. So the number of cyclists using an area influences at some point the trigger point where drivers are more likely to be looking for cyclists as one of them. So they really just ran this one in a huge way with research and fun simulators and cool stuff. From us, from a design and perspective and the like, what we sort of looked at then was, well, how do we alter this to make it then better? One of the things that was sort of discovered was if you could position the cyclist more into the lane, then the drivers are more likely to stop. And so the guidance became then to try to get the cyclist to claim the lane, so to move into a central position as they navigate around the roundabout. And then the common thing is to use this little marking. Prize for the first person who tells me what that marking is called. It's quick. It's a Charo, that's correct. Vinay's first on that, I think. So try to get the cyclist to claim the lane. So that has a couple of advantages, one being that more central position. The other is that a vehicle can't shoot past a cyclist that's there because they've claimed the whole thing. They've got to wait behind it. Now, the question is, the point is, this is a safer treatment. However, it's not going to be great for like an 8-year-old to try to get an 8-year-old to claim the lane over a 4-wheel drive and the like. So it's going to be good for our confident and cyclists and our commuter cyclists and those sort of things, but we can do, I suppose, a little bit better. And the gold standard at urban roundabouts for cyclist safety and pedestrian safety are these Dutch-inspired protected roundabouts, and they reduce the likelihood and severity of crashes for pedestrians and cyclists, and vehicles are getting wonderful advantages in a safety perspective. And this is where you provide that dedicated cycle way around and priority for cyclists and pedestrians in a circulating carriageway outside of the vehicle circulating carriageway. So we're seeing more and more of these around Australia and New Zealand. I think, just trying to think whether New Zealand's put one in yet, or they're all just in concepts and designs, if anybody knows of one. But here's, a built one. So you see, if a cyclist wants to turn right, they come up here and they sort of go around, and then they go around like that. A couple of little design features and things as auditors we can look at with this. This is probably a better photo for it. Providing that space is good, and it's really for me about a vehicle exiting is actually out of the circulating carriageway. I don't really particularly care about that. I don't care if the roundabout gets like clogged up. It's obviously an area that's got enough pedestrian and cyclist activity and demand that's a priority user. But that does help in that sense. But it's this one that I'm more excited about, and it's because you don't then store a vehicle on the crossing point. So vehicles will wait back here, and then there's another vehicle here, and then when that vehicle goes, they sort of go up and then they go to there. Yeah, okay, occasionally there's one with a trailer or a truck that then sort of blocks the crossing point, but in general, it seems to work pretty well.
Just a question that's come through, Ken, if you got a sec.
Yeah.
Would we recommend having pedestrian crossing right at the exits of roundabouts, seeing lots nowadays?
Yeah, so you can do it. So it's one of the things I talk about a bit in the raised crossing course that we run. If you've got your pedestrian crossing right up here, it can certainly be done, and it can be done safely. And the exiting vehicle, I'm not concerned about from the safety perspective or anything like that. That will block up the roundabout. Your roundabout will be clogged. So from a traffic flow perspective, you get a lesser outcome. But as I say, I'm not usually too concerned by that in the areas where these are getting put. For me, it's more about this vehicle trying to enter the roundabout, storing across pedestrian crossing areas. So we did a study of a couple of these roundabouts where we put cameras out to monitor for a few weeks how many cyclists were actually using this and going around, and how many were just giving up on that and taking the quick way through the roundabout, or even going the opposite way around for a shorter run through. And we had over 80% of cyclists were using it correctly. So that was pretty good. There were some that just used it the normal way, and then the occasional one that went the other way, but that was quite rare. So Gareth has pointed out some documentation around some of this stuff, so that's great. Thank you. We're going to take a break fairly soon. I'll do a couple more slides. And as we go, so the raised intersections, which we've been talking about, and this is another picture of the one down in Christchurch, the research and evidence from there's sort of 10 of these signalised intersections with raised crossings across Australia, showed good improvements for vehicle-to-vehicle safety, but also pretty significant reductions in trauma for pedestrians and cyclists as well. So if we've got, these large signalised intersections, slowing vehicles through them are going to help cyclists as well. And another picture of the protected signalized intersection. So the advantages being there that turn radius for a vehicle and the ability for the cyclist to see that. So another good example of what can be done. And again, with the right turning cyclists, they're able to come in and store, go up and store and then make their turn. I'll do a couple more slides, then I'll let you get your coffee. So auditing this design, it looked quite good from the sense that it had a separated cycle facility here, so that cyclists going straight through had this separated run through the multi-lane roundabout, and there was a little storage area for cyclists that wanted to go right. There were very few cyclists that want to go right. There's nothing really down this road, but I thought it was pretty good from that sense. Then the post-opening audit, though, when they build it and then you get out there and you look at it and you're like, oh, okay, I'm not sure that it's clear enough that this is for cyclists. It kind of looks like a footpath. And I think some cyclists would probably get to here and then they would go, oh, well, that's the end of my lane. And they go, okay, there's a little cyclist only sign, but is that enough? And this is where I think a bit of green paint, which was in the end the recommendation, just a bit of green marking there would have done the job and really encourage cyclists through there. A bit of sweeping wouldn't go astray either, but so that's not the traditional use of green pavement marking. Green pavement marking was traditionally used for a conflict point between cyclists and vehicles, highlighting that. So a vehicle approaching that location is a bit more alert to the fact that a cyclist could be coming. That's its traditional use. And nowadays, it's used more and more as also a device to try to direct a cyclist where to travel. Okay, I think I better let you have your coffee, and I'll check how far behind I am, but we're going to talk about pedestrians and motorcyclists as well. And I do have a few more things to talk about. So I'll leave this here with a Wally, and then we'll play the video when we get back. So let's take 4 minutes. Time for a coffee. Get a coffee or a glass of water, and we'll get back into it in 4 minutes. Hey, let's get back into it. Got my coffee, so I'm ready to go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about dooring now and have a look at this little video. Okay, so good video for the point I'm about to make, which is that dooring, the fatalities we've seen across the world, and the high-level serious injuries associated with dooring are actually secondary crash impacts, where the cyclist has been knocked into a travel lane and then been run over or struck by the vehicles. So you can see it happened in this one, really, and just very lucky that they didn't get run over by that car. So we certainly get injuries and sometimes severe injuries from the hitting of the door itself. So separated cycleways are really the answer to a lot of the dooring issues, and that's where we we push cyclists curbside and we push parking out. Okay, this one doesn't have parking, but you'd put your parking out here and have some sort of buffer for the doors. One of the things I like this one because vehicles turning in can often be a challenge for the separated cycle facilities, sometimes because of sight lines, and slowing vehicles on that turn is good. And this is one way you can do it. So also in these separated facilities, you can do things to certainly, provide pedestrian priority across these areas, but also, in some locations, you may want to slow cyclists, and you can use vertical deflection. That's a speed hump for cyclists on the approach to this crossing point. Oh, it's in Christchurch as well, isn't it? Yeah. The idea of a cyclist priority crossing is essentially like this, where we are creating essentially a road or an intersection. So you give way markings, and the cyclists and pedestrians have priority across this. Raising that is a really wonderful safety feature in the fact that the vehicles slow down at that point. Yeah. So, and another one that I think is really quite elegant is your cyclist bypass lane. So this is where, if you're doing local area traffic management features like one-way slow points or chicanes or the like, we can, and a lot of people have in the past, built this up right out to the curb and had it as a garden or whatever. And then the cyclist sort of gets squeezed in with vehicles. But if you can create that cyclist bypass facility, the vehicles then have this one-way slow point and they're waiting and slowing down, and the cyclist gets a free run without being squeezed in as part of that. It's sort of general cycling treatment philosophy is low speed is where you can mix on the street between cyclists and vehicles. As soon as you're above sort of that 30 kilometers an hour, you want dedicated separated facilities with physical separation, and potentially putting parking also as a buffer. And then once you're into the high speed roads, is fully separated bike and shared path facilities and off-road bike. We can't be mixing. I will take questions in a second. I'm just going to finish off the cyclist bit and then we'll pause. And I just want to mention briefly that you may be asked to do a safe system audit of a shared path facility, cycleway or the like that exists, and looking for issues, and or even the design of one. You would usually do that and you would ride the whole facility. And this is me with a colleague out there, and we were riding just like 50 kilometers of path network around a city. It wasn't, like one of the best gigs you'll ever get is to audit that. You're just basically riding around for a few days and taking lots of photos. We use a dash cam on the bike. I take an electronic level, so I can look at the grades of some of the steeper parts, and I also use it to measure heights of underpasses and distance of hazards off the path and the like. And I use this app. It's called Context Cam. I think there's lots of them. I think Solo locates one. But the reason I do it is a few reasons. One, I can also add a little note to remember what my issue is. But it also gives me, a bit of data with it. And the other one is that you can just dump all your photos into Google Earth or Google Maps or any of those, and it just drops them all out exactly where your issues are. So when you've got this massive network that you're looking at, you do that, you drop them all in and they just landed exactly where the issues were. And that's a nice thing for them to give to the client, and you can add some risk ratings and prioritize things as it's nice and clear. But anyway, that's a sort of practical practice. You don't have to use that. It's just one if you had something like that. But path-to-path intersections, which I'm what I'm talking about here, a bit like road intersections, you want to be sure and clear with your priority and good sight lines, advance warning, 90-degree ideally intersections. This one was just confusing. It's like, okay, they've just built this path, and we were out there sort of having a look at that, and I'm like, well, who's got priority here? And then, it's fine when there's hardly anybody around, but if you've got lots of people, cyclists shooting through, coming down, it could be a bit of an issue. That's another cycle path priority challenge there. Here's interesting. Here's the guidance around, instead of putting up those fences to get cyclists at these areas, they talk about creating some sort of splitter island for cyclists. Edge drop-offs. Think about cycleways with run-off road crashes, and often these are shared paths. We've got dogs and kids and all sorts of things, so cyclists often have to avoid things, and certainly would want to think about cyclist-friendly fencing here, and even drop-offs like this, same challenge. But when I say cyclist-friendly fencing, it's not this. This is not cyclist-friendly fencing. That will catch handlebars and pedals and the like. Cyclist-friendly fencing essentially has points pushed out where if a cyclist hits it, they can hit at shoulder height, and sometimes you have one around hip height. But that idea of the continuous rail that doesn't catch the handlebar or pedal. Think about the back of W-beam systems or the back of guardrail systems. So this new pathway was protected by this barrier system, but the back of the posts were not thought about from a cyclist hitting those. And there are products available. You can do post capping, you can do backing rails, as you can see there. And if you do have obstacles in the path, they need to be well delineated so at night they can be seen. This would not be seen at night. In fact, I think somebody's put that there to try to warn other cyclists at night. Yeah, so we want to see some, if you have to have a hazard in a path, highlight it with flexible bollards with retroreflective marking and some advanced line marking warning. This is a pretty good setup in terms of if you're stuck with that cable stay. I think they've done a really good job here. Okay, questions before we talk about another vulnerable road user?
Right, one that came through earlier. Occasionally, we are asked to review Kiwi Rail LCSIA reports relating to pedestrian and cyclist safety. LCSIA seem to be based on a risk assessment approach rather than a safe system approach to road safety. Should we also be doing safe system audits?
Yeah, good question. It's probably one we should ask Sam Paisley, who is coming in later, because he does a lot of that level crossing assessment stuff. I certainly know that the ALCAM methodology for rail level crossing assessments, yeah, as mentioned, there is a risk-based one, and it's a kind of black box of variables you put in and it spits out its risk. I always get nervous when there's any of those that you want to look logically at the whole thing. Let's ask Sam when he comes in. I would say safe system around rail is an interesting beast, because safe system is not so much about managing energy often. and you just can't manage energy with trains. There's too much energy and too much momentum, so too much weight and too much but so you end up going to the more airplane approach, which is absolute elimination of risk, likelihood, essentially, or getting to try to absolutely eliminate likelihood. So it's a slightly different way of thinking about it, which you can some way I can make an argument for the approach that they use being appropriate. But yeah, anyway, let's ask Sam when he comes in. I'll take a note of that.
That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, pedestrians. Another area. This is an area of a bit of passion for me, especially around raised crossings. I just like the value of raised crossings is so huge that I just want everybody building raised crossings, just everywhere. But let me talk about some of the issues we'd look at as auditors for pedestrians. Okay, first, let's talk about sight lines to pedestrian crossings. And it's certainly an area of, I would say, misunderstanding from a lot of the industry. And so sightline requirements do get a little bit somewhat complex, I suppose, when you're thinking about pedestrian crossings, but there's some pretty obvious principles we can talk about as auditors, and it's, providing that sightline on the approach and at least 1.6 meter setback should be a sight triangle there and you just do a normal safe intersection sight distance calculation for the vehicle based on the speed and the operating speed of approaching vehicle. So this one doesn't, have that because of the landscaping, and that's something you might look at as part of your safe system audit, is landscaping plans and the like. The other interesting thing about this, and hot topic of debate in our industry at the moment, is slip lanes and what is the appropriate treatment for pedestrians crossing slip lanes, because a driver approaching this will be looking to their right because they're wanting to know whether they can enter the traffic stream. So we've got a pedestrian then coming from the left with priority and the crossing. So yeah, it becomes a little bit of an issue. Generally, there seems to be some consensus that a raised crossing at this location is a much safer treatment, but then the real debate comes in as to is it better to not mark this as a crossing, or to mark it like it is, or to signalize it, or to not provide a slip lane at all? And you can do a bit of Googling on that, or download this, have a look at our safe system snippet we did on it. And then we had official complaints from other consultants that we were misrepresenting this other research, and it's like fun that people are taking such interest and excitement in the topic. I still think what we presented is good. That's kind of the joy of being a consultancy, is that you can put things out there and have that debate. It's a lot harder often for Waka Kotahi or a council to put some of this out there and for discussion. Anyway, I digress. Again, I think this one was really a good one. Christchurch again, is it? Yeah. The reason for it is, when you have your one-way street system setups, it can be a little bit confusing sometimes for pedestrians as to where they're looking for vehicles. And crossing this slip lane, the risk is quite... the likelihood of crash, I would say, has increased because pedestrian is kind of looking that way for a vehicle on the slip lane, but actually the vehicles would be coming from this way. So you're kind of thinking that, but nicely addressed with the slowing down of vehicles using raised platform there. I would have probably liked to see it as a full raised crossing in its own right, rather than still having, you know, what the clarity on priority is a little bit ambiguous there. But the slowing down is significantly, helping that. We've got to think about the swept path of larger vehicles tracking over pedestrian areas. That's something we look at a lot at design stage, is the swept path of larger vehicles. Ferg is going to come in and talk about that a little bit more, about what we do as auditors in terms of looking at swept path diagrams and understanding the choice of design vehicle and checking vehicle and, tracking and, when people fudge swept path diagrams and things like that. But we do want to think about that. We also want to think about what's not there sometimes. So, like, if there are no pedestrian sidewalks, so no footpaths or the like, it will mean that it, in winter, and if you're pushing a pram or you're in a go for scooter thing, you're going to be riding on the road and walking on the road. And yeah, we do want to think about that. And something like this, which is a pedestrian, route, and you can see this lady is walking there now, but if that was muddy or pushing something, as she goes over the crest, it's a pretty nasty scenario of a higher speed road and a pedestrian likely walking in the gutter or the like. So, of course, we just are able to recommend separated facilities. Sometimes hard to do. Pedestrian desire line, I'm sure you've heard the term. And if you haven't, it's something you will use as a safe system auditor, no doubt, because we're thinking about, well, where are pedestrians coming from? Where do they want to go? And what's the straight line between that? And that's the pedestrian desire line. And you can see the pedestrian desire line playing out here. Okay, she is going that way and then down, because her desire line is slightly off that. And so she'll walk on the road on the wrong side of the pedestrian fencing for a bit, and then to the gap, and off she goes. And that's probably a good illustration of why pedestrian fencing can cause some issues. So we don't tend to like pedestrian fencing. I like pedestrian fencing in a few locations on the network, but it's not used to corral pedestrians. Occasionally, there's good application of it at specific areas. But where I like pedestrian fencing is outside pubs or bars or nightclubs. And that's not to try to stop people crossing the road at particular locations. It's literally a containment device. I've done 2 coronial investigations now of people being killed exiting drinking establishments, and one of them, 2 people were fighting and they fell out onto the road and were struck, and the second one, it's a bit unclear exactly what the gentleman fell out of this down some steps and straight onto the road. So, the idea of having fences there is it's to contain that rather than to stop people directly crossing at that location. And I say the same at outside schools, that you use it to contain that possibility that they're chasing a ball or running or playing around or whatever it is, from getting onto the road. Pedestrian desire line, this is a nice little thing that I saw online, so I thought I'd grab it. User experience versus what we've designed, and we sort of want to think about that for pedestrian. Well, how are they actually going to use it? Where are they going to want to go? And are there proper facilities for that? Okay, a few more things, and unfortunately, I use sites where we've investigated incidents to try to highlight points. Maybe it's fortunate that we've got the information and that others will learn from it, and we won't build this kind of thing in the future. But this one was an incident that occurred. We have, this is what the vehicle sees. And the next photo is sort of taken just behind here. That's what the pedestrians see. And the priority, who's got priority here? Well, vehicles have priority because it's not a marked crossing. And it didn't take long, my colleague and I sort of standing out there watching, to these two gentlemen walked up, chatting to each other, and just walked straight out across. And the vehicle slowed down and let them cross. Unfortunately, at one point, the vehicle didn't, not with these two, but with somebody else. And you kind of boil it down to confusion of priority. Pedestrians think they have a priority there because of the way it's been designed. The vehicle sees a different thing and thinks they have priority. And the key thing I always say is, let's not confuse priority. Let's just be clear. Let's not try to do things that are somewhat confusing. Here's another example. Excuse me. Airports are full of road safety issues. But this is vehicle priority, but it's very hard to get that. And you get off the plane and you're going to get picked up and you sort of walk across there. It's it's not clear. The idea of any sort of, and I think somebody's making the comment here, courtesy crossing, I do not like. And New Zealand has, Waka Kotahi's put out statements saying that, it's courtesy crossings are no more a thing that we will be pushing. There was a time when it was done. The idea of a courtesy crossing was to try to get vehicles to slow down, and okay, well, just put in the proper pedestrian crossing facility, or don't purposely create that possible confusion of priority. So this sort of stuff I'm not a fan of. This stuff I am a fan of. A nicely designed, proper raised pedestrian crossing. It's a wonderful safety feature. It's equitable. It is a good thing for all road users, and it really helps. Okay, another fatality site for a pedestrian that we can learn from and hopefully not do this. This is where the pedestrian stepped out and was struck by a vehicle coming through here at speed and killed. And that's sort of what the pedestrian sees. Let's have a look at a little bit of on this service road. So that first photo was taken over here, looking that way. And if we go back a little bit further, this is a high-speed road, and it goes into this service road with vehicles sort of entering that at quite high speed. So if you go back to here, you've got the crossing here going, and when you're actually out there, it kind of draws you to step out there. And we believe that there could have been a bit of that almost see-through effect where the pedestrian was looking at all of that crossing and just stepped out and then was struck. So we can learn a bit from that. I mean, the continuation of the signals through there would have been good, or some sort of connection of this. And certainly the slowing of vehicles as they enter this environment is also would have been a good thing to have done. It's how it is now, which is a raised pedestrian crossing. Been lovely to have that at the start rather than having to wait for the fatality before that. before that raised crossing went in. There you go. Interesting one in terms of, now we're into a bit of details of design, where they went with the approach of ramping it down to curb, and so that's to assist with their drainage. It becomes a little bit challenging in terms of less abled people being able to transverse this on a mobility scooter, or older people can find it a bit of a challenge. I mean, overall, we get huge safety benefits with having this, and probably saved an absolute ton of money by not having this all connected up in terms of a absolute flat run through. Because you would have had to then alter your drainage pits, and there's a lot more civil works associated with it. But yeah, so I kind of like it from the sense that we could probably build another 3 of these for the cost of having to get it all flat. But in an ideal world, yes, it would be completely sort of step free. Okay, that's lots of talking from me. I'm going to get you to do a little bit of an exercise here, a little bit of predicting, and then we'll have a look while you're thinking about that for any questions that have popped up. But this is a site, it exists now, but I'm going to get you to practice that thinking about risk, because there's a location here that has 4 pedestrian serious injury crashes at the exact same spot in this exact same way. What we're going to do shortly is put up a poll. So don't write your answer into the chat here. A poll will come up and you'll be able to guess on the poll. But I'm going to give you some options of where and how the crashes happen. And they've all 4 are in the same spot with the same crash type. So the options you've got, and I've given you 5 options to choose from. So number 1 there is a vehicle. So vehicles are the solid line, and dotted line is pedestrian. That's pretty international crash diagram consistent approach. The pedestrian crossing there at 1 and the vehicle turning over it. 2 is the pedestrian crossing at the signalized intersection and the vehicle turning there. 3 is the pedestrian crossing from the island out and being struck by a vehicle in the slip lane there. 4 is like 3, except for on this other leg, which has some slightly different geometric characteristics. And 5 is a vehicle turning into this and the pedestrians walking along the footpath. So let's put the poll up. And you get to have your guess at which one you think is the location and the crash that has had 4 pedestrian serious injury crashes. Remember, you're not being marked on this, so you can have a guess. And we'll see how people go. I'm going to read the chat and see if there's any questions. Yeah. Okay, you're doing well there. So I'm just reading some of the questions and comments. Where would I use a courtesy crossing instead of a priority zebra crossing? Nowhere. I would never use a courtesy crossing, is the answer. And I would almost never use a zebra crossing, an at-grade zebra crossing. I would raise it. So I'd raise that a normal zebra crossing in a speed environment of anything above 40 is not a road safety device. And in fact, in a lot of situations, increases risk because you've still got the speed, and it makes people feel better as pedestrians, but from a road safety perspective, not good. But you raise it, and we're talking about sort of 70% reduction in death and serious injury. And it sounds like there's, we've got one question or comment in there around a specific of a school, and it does sound like raised pedestrian crossing in the middle of that one is a logical answer. I don't mind speed calming on the approach as well, but yeah, certainly a raised pedestrian crossing would be a good answer. It's pretty much a good answer in all situations, in my opinion. Okay, let's see how people went. Let's end that poll. Let's display the results. What are people thinking? Looks like number one is getting a lot of attention there. And everyone got a bit of a vote. 1, 3, and then 2. Okay, let's stop sharing those results, please. And I'll give you the answer. Before I give you the answer, I'll say I put each one of those specifically in because there is a risk at each of them. So you're well within your right to have picked whichever one you picked. But the one that actually had the 4 serious injury crashes is number 2. So well done to the 4 people who said number 2. Number one has a lot of weirdness about it. It just hasn't played out. But the reason 2 is especially bad is because it's kind of odd that the pedestrian crossing is that side of the slip lane. So the pedestrian crossing should go into the island, and then pedestrians should cross there. Okay, it's not the greatest point to cross, but at least it's at like a point where you've got a chance, really, of the vehicle. This one, the vehicle is absolutely looking that way, right, at that point. And also, just the configuration of the signals mean as these vehicles are stopping, and this, we've got the pedestrian crossing the road because the lights have gone green for them. So this is really weird setup. So as I say, each of them had risk, so don't get too concerned. But I mean, this should have gone into here and then like that at least, and then ideally we would have raised the crossing here or the like. So I think, yeah, again, to have all these injuries before it got rectified, and you can see that it's now crossed to there, and then the crossing point, which will be safer. Is it completely safe? We could probably do a bit better. I do find this just weird that they've got this little entry in here and things, but yeah. Okay, we were talking a little bit about schools. If you're doing a safe system audit, anywhere near a school, you're going to want to see it during school drop-off, pickup, how it operates. You've got to get out there and see it and see how people are using the facilities and the like. I think I've adequately told you how good raised pedestrian crossings are, but they really do reduce the likelihood of crashes, the severity of crashes, and they're just a good treatment. They actually even have benefits for, like, they act as a local area traffic management feature. They say slow vehicles through an area, positioned often near intersections, and you get that reduction in energy at the intersection as well. So just wonderful. I might finish with pedestrians on this little thing to say we know what safety is for pedestrians. We've known it for a long time. And let me explain why. Like, this is quite a while ago. This one's actually in Adelaide. But during the time that some workers were working on the signals and the like, they lowered the speed limit on this road from 60 to 25. That's the South Australian work zone speed limit. So 60 down to 25. And then they put these barriers out there to protect the workers from any vehicle that, leaves and enters that environment. And then they did their work for whatever it was, a week or so, a week or two, and then they removed all the barriers and they put the speed limit back up to 60, and about 3,000 pedestrians a day stand in that location. For some reason, the workers are afforded a level of safety which is highly aligned with safe system principles, but the travelling public are not. And people say, well, the workers were, they're concentrating on their work. Like the pedestrians are concentrating on their phone, or they're intoxicated, or all of these things going on. So they actually should be the ones afforded a lot more luxury. But anyway, so what I'm saying is we know how to provide these safe areas for pedestrians, at least at a philosophical perspective. We just have never, a lot of the time don't afford that safety to the travelling public. Okay, doing well here, and I'm going to finish with motorcycles, and it gets us nicely along, ready to get you out there doing some safe system assessing or safe system auditing. Motorcyclists are a highly vulnerable road user group. We have these documents called the Making Roads Motorcycle Friendly series. There is a New Zealand version. It's this document. And what it does is it provides a suite of things that influence motorcycle safety from a road design, operation, maintenance perspective, things that we can do and we know. So it's worth downloading and having a flick through. But I like to think about the 5 S's of motorcycle safety. Sight, surface signs, strike, and speed. And if we think about that, like being able to see a motorcyclist and the motorcyclist seeing what's coming up, and the surface we provide, and the warning signs to warn, inform, and guide, and the like, they're all influencing the chance of the crash happening. The strike, to make an S word out of that, is about the crash happening and how what are they hitting? What are they striking? Is it something, is it a rigid pole, or is it something they can run along? And the speed of the rider, but also speed of vehicles, influences both the chance of a crash and how bad the crash is, the severity of the crash. So there's some recent research around the biomechanics of injury in motorcyclists. It's quite interesting. And it showed us, I suppose it gave us information to say that motorcyclists can withstand more energy than pedestrians and cyclists, but nowhere near as much as a vehicle occupant, a car occupant. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Like, a car's got all those extra features and the cage around it and seatbelts and everything like that. Motorcyclists can withstand a little bit more force. Some of it's to do with the helmet and the body armor and things that is sometimes worn. Some of it is just simply to do with the physical stature of of the bulk of motorcycle riders, in the sense that they can withstand a bit more force, in the sense that you don't have very old, frail people riding motorbikes often, and you don't have very young people riding motorcycles, so they sort of self-select in the sense that they've got a physical stature that can hold a bit more force. There's some diagrams there with some more detail in there. But let's talk about sight. So I'll just highlight this with 1 or 2 pictures for each. We're not going to go into depth in any of this, but motorcyclists small, get hidden behind objects. So as a safe system auditor, thinking about that when you're looking at sight distance impediments, so signal controller boxes, you can see there trees blocking and these sorts of things. So we're aware of that. The surface, really important to provide this good surface on the approach to a curve, through a curve, or anywhere that a rider might be taking an evasive action, like through an intersection or the like. And riders lean to take curves and corners, which is pushing their center of gravity out and putting huge reliance on the surface conditions and attraction there. So we call motorcyclists the canary in the coal mine when it comes to surface issues, because they're so reliant on it. And things like depressions, potholes, flushing, bleeding pavements, anything like that is going to cause trouble for a rider. And even things, like steel plates need to be thought about, well, for cyclists as well, but with a bit of moisture on that, and a rider maybe riding behind another vehicle so they don't see it, we've got some issues. Surface issues as well with line marking. So thermoplastic line marking is quite slippery after it gets polished up a bit. When it first goes down, it's not too bad, but then you really have to be concerned after it polishes up a bit with vehicles going over it, and we really don't want to see large swathes of line marking like this. We just want to we need line marking out there, but let's think about how we do that. Signs. There are motorcycle warning signs, and I believe this is used in New Zealand. It's gone into the New Zealand signage suite as for trial. So I'll have to actually look that up and just make sure it is in there. If you have a specific hazard for a motorcyclist, you can warn of. This is another one which there's a lot of interest in, and it's used in different jurisdictions. It's where we have a curve with two radiuses, essentially, a bigger radius into a smaller radius. I'll give a prize if anybody can tell me the actual technical name for this curve. It's a bit of a tricky question. Let's see if there's people in road design. Gareth's on it. It is a compound curve. Well done. It's excellent. A spiral curve is a good guess, but a spiral curve actually has multiple radiuses tightening, so it's continuously tightening. A compound curve has this more one into another. But really hazardous for motorcyclists, compound curves, because the rider will lock in their line and their speed based on the radius and what they can see on this one. And as it tightens up, they just do not have the ability to stay on their side of the road. Or stay on the road. Here's a compound curve so we've got a 252 radius curve into a 117. So it's it does tighten up. And there's 4 motorcycle runoff road casualty crashes. Now they've got a gravel road entering onto a sealed road, so we're going to have gravel wash onto the road as well. So it's an interesting example there. And I mean, just in case anybody isn't quite or is new to some of this, we talk about curve radiuses based on like if you were to draw a big circle around that, what's the radius of that? That's that curve. And what's the radius of that? That's that. That's how we measure it in meters, if that makes sense. Bit of road design 101 there. Strike hazard. Okay, so now you're hitting something, or the rider's hitting something. We want to think about that. So there is a European crash test protocol for motorcycles into barrier systems, and they get a normal crash test dummy. Actually, they put leathers on it and put a helmet on it and slight few other modifications. They weld the thumbs of it and things. But anyway, then they slide it at 60 kilometers per hour, 25 degree at the post. And you can see there, destroys the dummy. That would kill the motorcyclist if it was a real person. But when we add underrun protection, it goes to within survivable thresholds. It's not the most, it wouldn't be the most friendly thing, but definitely survivable with some lower order injuries. So, yeah, there is the ability to manage some energy for motorcycle crashes, and underrun protection is a good one. So if you've got those popular motorcycle routes that you're auditing, you really want to be thinking about adding this underrun protection to existing barrier systems, or certainly if there's new barrier systems going in, ensuring that they have that motorcycle underrun protection. And there's lots of specific products available. So I talk about them in the general sense of underrun protection. There is Rubrail, which is a more public domain system. There's MPR, Biker Shield, and lots of different proprietary products as well. Riders leave the road on the outside of the curve. I mean, physics kind of dictates that. Cars, they're a bit more of a 50-50 inside to outside of curve because of the overcorrection. So they'll start by going to the outside of the curve and then overcorrect and crash onto the inside of the curve a lot of the time as well. So we really do want to be conscious of the outside of the curve for motorcyclists. Here you can see part of the Coromandel loop there with the surface issue, and the outside of the curve with these concrete blocks. It's not going to be great for cars either, but these concrete blocks. So if a rider was to come off, that's going to cause some significant damage. In terms of underrun protection, we don't connect anything to the end terminal of the barrier. And that's the end terminal. The reason for that is we don't know how that would function with something connected to it, and none of the manufacturers have tested it. It costs a lot of money to test these things, so nobody's actually gone to that trouble to create or test something. Yeah, so if you're auditing and you saw they'd connected it all the way up, you'd flag that, because we just worried that it would compromise the function in the end terminal in its own right, and it could be a danger for other road users. So a lot of miscommunication around wire rope safety barriers and motorcyclists. I mean, the idea that somehow the wires are slicing motorcyclists is just not true. If a motorcyclist, in the very small number of incidents where motorcyclists have hit wire rope safety barrier systems, they've been sliding on the ground and they've hit the base, the post, or they've hit upright around the wires and then the rider's gone over the top. Nobody's been sliced up by the wires. That's just complete myth. And the reason that there's just hardly any crashes involving motorcyclists is where we would use wire rope safety barrier systems. It's just not an area where riders are likely to come off and slide into it. Like, you wouldn't use it around that curve on the Coromandel because you physically couldn't. You can't place a barrier system in tension on a curve radius like that. You tighten up the wires, and your posts would just bend in. If you've got to, exaggerate it. If you've got a, wire rope barrier on a curve like that, tighten it up. Yeah, well, it just wants to pop in, so it'll actually move the posts out. So we just wouldn't use it on a curve like that, which is a higher risk spot for the motorcyclist running off the road and striking the system. So, I mean, we have tried in a few occasions these stack cushions on the posts. To be honest, it's not a great treatment. You're trying to absorb it. It's like a rugby post padding. Like, okay, that's going to work at some specific speeds, and usually it's people's running speed, and they can protects them a bit. But when you're traveling faster than that, you just can't absorb that energy with that cushioning. You really need to try to redirect energy along and wash it out over time, the way you do with an underarm protection. So we don't have a great facility and feature for this for wire rope systems. But these days, you would just not use a wire rope system if it was a popular motorcycle route, because we've got flexible W-beam systems. You'd use like an Easy Guard or a Ram Shield or the like with an underrun protection every time. Anyway, that's it. And speed. Well, we can influence speed through advisory speed, speed limits, local area traffic management, all sorts of ways that you can influence speed. And any way you can do that is good. If you're looking at a motorcycle route or any route really, consistency of advisory speeds is important. Consistency is key. I don't care whether a rider is going to actually follow that 35. I care that 35 curve and then the one down the road that's marked 35 has the same characteristics. So you want to run your proper ball bank indicator through and understand that. Would we do that as auditors? Do a full sort of ball bank on a route? Potentially, but it would be more ones that you drive the route and you go, oh, that a bit suspicious of that. And then you make some comment around that in the report, maybe suggest they undertake that ball bank indicator test. But if you're doing a motorcycle specific route and you're doing a motorcycle audit, so you take that rider out there with you and they ride the route, and they, you usually connect a microphone into their helmet and you record it all and the like. They'll tell you the curves that are inappropriately signed, because they're very good at feeling that and judging that. So that's a nice part of the motorcycle auditing. I'm a licensed rider. I don't ride though. I got my license. I did some riding, so I knew a bit more about the road user. But we love getting a rider and then being a trailing car and we look at the route and the rider looks at the route, and then you stop at different points and you chat about it. It's good. It's a good holistic process, and it's really a practice that can provide some good insights into improvements we can make for motorcycle safety. This was an urban motorcycle audit, which is a bit rarer. Usually it's the touring routes that you do, but this one we had our rider out the front and she was riding and telling us what she was seeing. And this happened to be like the back of the W-beam system exposed. So the worry was, if a rider was here and then a vehicle merged in front of it because they didn't see the bike because the bike's smaller and pushed the rider into the back, they just get snagged on the back of the system. So connecting that up with a back-to-back system or be good. Okay, I think that's probably about it from me. Oh, geez, right on time too. I didn't realize the time had flown.
Right on time, and you finished everything. That's great.
Yeah. Well, you've got a quiz, people. You've got a quiz. That's all you've got to do, and finish off anything that's left, because the end of next session, I think we give you a big assignment.
Yeah, so next Wednesday, module 5, Fergus Tate will be presenting with Ken. So yeah, but that's all for today. Don't forget the quiz in module 4.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.
Have a good weekend. Bye.